Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, November 15th. Today we'll be talking about the possibility that some of the refugees from Afghanistan will find their way to Vermont and perhaps even to southern Vermont. Governor Phil Scott has indicated that Vermont would be ready to accept about 100 Afghan refugees, and there's a possibility that some of them will wind up settling down here in our end of the state. So here today to discuss that with us, we're really pleased to have with us today two special guests for our program. Kate Paarlberg-Kvam is the executive director of CASP, or the Community Action Asylum Seekers Project. That organization is based over in Brattleboro, and their mission is to cultivate a supportive community for those seeking asylum in the U.S. while offering basic needs and accompanying them on their journey towards building a life in this country. Kate, very pleased to have you with us today, and thank you very much for making the time for this conversation.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
We're also very pleased to have with us today Anandaroopa, who is a Vietnamese American living in Arlington, Vermont. He's one of the main coordinators of the Bennington County Open Arms group. It's an informal volunteer group that started out last July to host some of the new arrivals from specifically Afghan refugee families in our corner of Vermont. With a growing list of volunteers and a fiscal sponsor, the Dorset Church, BCOA, is currently going through the application process with the Ethiopian Community Development Council in Brattleboro to be a sponsor of an Afghan refugee family. Ananda, very pleased to have you with us as well. Thank you very much for joining. So I thought just to help us get started here, would have each of you describe your organizations in a bit more detail than what I just gave. And Kate, let me start with you. Tell us a little bit about CASP and what you do and how you came to be.
Yeah, thanks for that. The Community Asylum Seekers Project is a small nonprofit that started 5 years ago in much the same way that Bennington County Open Arms is starting this year. And so it was really fun for us to sort of, be in contact with Ananda and talk about how that process was unfolding. We began in 2016, in part due to a response to what happened in Rutland in terms of trying to resettle people from Syria that, began and didn't come to the conclusion they were hoping for. The man, my predecessor, who founded CASP is named Steve Crofter, and Steve went on a volunteer trip to the US-Mexico border, and as part of that trip learned that asylum seekers often get stuck at the southern border in US immigration prison, in detention camps. And these are folks that have open asylum claims or are pursuing asylum claims and therefore are legally authorized to be in this country, but if they don't have a sponsor, they just get languish in immigration prison. And so that was something, something that small community groups could easily make a change in. And so they started as just a group of volunteers around a kitchen table. Steve went knocking door to door pretty much throughout Windham County and got a whole bunch of volunteers signed on, such that eventually we had to hire a full-time staff and, really, really get up and running. So that's where we are today. We have resettled 20 asylum seekers so far. And we are currently supporting 12 people. They come from Latin America, the Caribbean, and both East and West Africa. That's just based on who we have right now. It's not restricted that way. Supporting asylum seekers is a slightly different process than supporting refugees, only because asylum is a much longer process. The only difference between asylum seekers and refugees is where they file, right? So a refugee is a person who seeks asylum outside the country and is granted that refuge before arriving. An asylum seeker comes into the country and then seeks the same status. But it just takes longer in the legal process once they're here. So yeah, and as you said, we provide basic needs. We hook people up with pro bono immigration attorneys and we help file those claims. We provide access to medical care, mental health care, housing help. Most of the people that we support arrive and live in host homes and private homes until they're authorized to work, and then just build a life and become more self-sufficient in that way. Yeah, so we do that with a network, I should say, of about 200 to 300 volunteers in the area who really help us out and are indispensable in that support.
Okay, well, Anandaroopa, over to you. Tell us a little bit about the Bennington County Open Arms group that you got started.
Oh, thank you again, Andrew, for the opportunity. Actually, Kate did more than just call us to keep us in touch. Actually, we started thanks to Kate, who introduced the core members together. I was beginning the summer in June, July, we were looking to work with CSP in hosting asylum seekers. And of course, with the fiasco in Afghanistan and just what we saw in August, and myself being a Vietnamese immigrant to America and seeing what was happening in Afghanistan, the focus of BCOA became more in trying to be a sponsor to Afghan refugees currently, but we're not ruling anything out in the future. Having said that, we have been networking with different groups, organizations, learning what is the process, talking to Kate and now ECDC. We have just got a fiscal sponsored by Grace, thanks to the Dorset Church. They'll be looking after us, as well as they have, they've done a lot of volunteer work in helping homeless, setting up homeless shelter. So they are well managed, and luckily we have been able to find an affordable 2-bedroom apartment in Bennington that's going to be available in sometime early December, thanks to a very gracious former Peace Corps volunteer who's been kind of keeping this apartment for us until we have actually a family in the space. So right now we're just going through the application process and waiting to hear when and learning what it takes to be a sponsor. And I think we'll get training from CSP as well as ECDC as we continue. But in the meantime, one of my thing that we just found, other people who are hostings around the country has been telling me, one of the first thing you might want to find is a mosque near your home, because the high probability that your family will be a religious Muslim. So we found the closest mosque to Bennington, the apartment, 45 minutes away in Latham, which is closer than, let's say, if someone was settled in Rutland and had to go to Burlington for a mosque. I don't know what they do in Brattleboro, Kate, but they were very welcoming, and they Al Hidayah has already provided halal meat for all refugees in the Albany area. So we're on the list because that was one of our main BCOA's main concern: where to get halal meat in Manchester or Bennington. So we got that covered. So. And then we're going to be they're going to host us for a breakfast, a get to know us kind of meeting to learn what does it mean to be a Muslim in America. So hopefully we'll learn some of that cultural nuances to help our new fair rivals adjust.
Well, I was wondering if you could both bring us up to speed on what exactly the status is of these 100 or so Afghan refugees that we've been hearing about. Are they indeed kind of on their way to Vermont? Is that going to happen? What is our status on that at the moment?
Yeah, so the resettlement of evacuees from Afghanistan is happening by way of the State Department, and there are 9 NGOs that work with the State Department. We are not one of them, but we work alongside the Ethiopian Community Development Council, and so that's where my understanding of this process comes from. That's all a disclaimer to say I'm not necessarily in a position to have all the information. So what my understanding, just from talking to our partners, is that evacuees from Afghanistan are still mostly living in at military installations, mostly in Virginia. I believe that 2 men from Afghanistan have arrived to northern Vermont, around Burlington, and more are expected. There's been some back and forth as to whether evacuees have the choice of where to go. And if that's the case, undoubtedly people are going to choose to settle in communities with established Afghan populations before Vermont. But essentially when those communities get full, people may choose to come here. So yeah, my understanding is that between now and Christmas, these arrivals are expected.
Okay.
And just to add on that little for what Kate was talking about, we met Joe on last Saturday, and another briefing is that they do want to empty those camps. Evidently, they're well equipped for the summer heat, but not for the winter coming up. So it sounds like ECDC was getting their marching order from the State Department to move quicker. But as you know, housing is our limit in Vermont, and that's what BCOA is finding the problem. And if anyone has any opportunities to host, and the minimum time commitment is really 6 months and we'll work with that organization to move the new arrivals to more permanent housing. So that's another option.
And that's something that CASP has done, for years, is to have people in host homes. And that's something that, we have a process and a system worked out that usually works pretty well. And so, if folks locally in the Brattleboro or Bennington areas are interested in opening their homes, we're happy to be contacted to talk about what that process tends to look like.
And I'm sorry.
No, go right
If
ahead.
you want to talk more, one of the thing I was learning about this process is that most of the refugees that might come to Vermont are on this status called Humanitarian Parole, which is the State Department legalese way of categorizing this type of refugees. That means that they have to work towards becoming naturalized citizen and going through the asylum seeking process. And that's why I think CASP, it will be important for us down the road. If it looks like we'll probably get an HPP.
Yep.
So just to get in the weed a little bit, this is a group of refugees that come in with, they are, let's say maybe we saw on the plane in August, people just jumped on that plane and left Afghanistan. They might have the paperwork, but don't have it with them. So in the camp, they say, well, let's just put them as HP and then they can apply for their asylum after they've settled in the United States.
Yeah.
So is my understanding correct that roughly 25 or so Afghans are reckoned to be headed toward southern Vermont? Is that, I know the majority of them are likely to be up in Chittenden County, where, as you said earlier, Kate, is more of an infrastructure already set up to help them. But some of them may be coming down to our end.
That's what ECDC is expecting to have the capacity for. I believe it remains to be seen, how many people will fill that capacity. But I expect, there are enough people who need a place to go that's likely to happen. Yeah.
Okay. So what are their primary needs? They're coming with, so much mental baggage and probably not a lot of physical baggage, because they probably had to leave Afghanistan and leave most of their possessions behind and just barely got out. Sounds like after a very chaotic and kind of random kind of process that allowed them to get on planes, and other people who might have had the same kind of qualifications in terms of being folks who had helped U.S. forces while they were there in Afghanistan as interpreters or contractors or in some way or another. What do they need most of all in their first couple of weeks and months as they transition into living in Vermont?
So one of the things I would say right off the bat, and just to loop in what Ananda was just talking about in terms of the legal differentiations between different groups of evacuees, those things may seem like legalese, but they actually are very important in terms of what people's lived realities are going to be like. Evacuees from Afghanistan are not being given refugee status. This is something the State Department has elected not to afford them, which I think is a major problem. So people are pursuing lots and lots of different kinds of access to permanent residency. Some folks are pursuing P2 or P3 status, which is a refugee status. Folks, as you said, Andrew, who have worked with the military are often pursuing special immigrant visa status. The majority, from what I understand, are people who have been granted humanitarian parole, which is a 2-year, basically a stay of deportation for 2 years. And in that time, they'll be given certain benefits like work permits, health insurance, which is great because asylum seekers don't get those things right off the bat. That said, my understanding is that the 2 men from Afghanistan who have arrived in Vermont both have spouses and or children in Kabul, and they can't get them out. And they can't do that without lawyers, and people can't adjust their status without lawyers, and we don't have lawyers. We have a couple of immigration lawyers, and many of them are volunteers in the state, but they are way overloaded. And so one of the things that we're currently working on, along with the Vermont Law School and the Vermont State Refugee Office, is to try to create more resources in the state to encourage attorneys to take these cases pro bono. So that's a big need. It's not a need that people are going to need in the first couple of weeks, but if folks are arriving without their family members, we talk a lot. There's a lot of talk when supporting asylum seekers too about people having sort of post-trauma symptoms. And I think that's a misnomer, because separation from families is ongoing trauma. Moving to the country that essentially is responsible for your dislocation is an ongoing trauma. And so Those are the two things I would emphasize right away, to think about what folks might need, but asking them to would probably reveal more.
Mm. And Ananda, I imagine you have, well, you were a Vietnamese refugee yourself. You must have, you probably can draw on your own personal experiences to what folks arriving into a completely foreign environment from what they're used to have to cope with.
Well, thank you, Kate, for bringing the issues of mental trauma, because, as a Vietnamese refugee, I think it's always stay with you, this trauma. I realize, I mean, unless I saw during what happened in Afghanistan, that period, if I just switched the word Afghanistan to Vietnam or Saigon to Kabul, I felt like I was going through this fall of dislocation, of being separated from something safe to another unknown. And I think that's going to stay with one unless dealing with that. And I think that's what Kate was talking about, the legal immigration long-term. And yeah, we're not even there yet, because that's what we thought of too. We're going to need a good immigration lawyer for our HP refugees. So working backward, I think just from my own personal experience, the first thing is just a safe space. I hope, housing that's comfortable, and people knowing, even just to turn on the stove, or where to do your shopping. And hopefully that's what BCOA will be able to provide with our group of volunteers. And then there's be transportation, like getting a job. I think these HP have 2 years in order to work their way towards asylum status and naturalized citizen status, 3 to 5 years after that. So unemployment would be a big issue. So we've been working with groups who've come out and say, oh, I have a lot of employment opportunities in the service industries or in hotels and restaurants. But more importantly, Bennington College has come up with they've asked, if you get an Afghan professor, please, we were willing to consider them for a position, or people working in maintenance or administration at Bennington College. Other groups have come up and saying, well, if you have someone with this kind of skills, I need someone hospital nursing skills. Well, let's find out the profile of our new arrivals. So we're organizing ourselves to around those kind of needs. Housing, I think we're okay with. Food, halal, got it. Unemployment, and then long-term lawyers, immigration. And of course, because like you said, reunification with maybe their family members they've left in Vietnam. And at the same time, I would expect some people who come here do not want to be here because they felt like the U.S. failed them and left them as their allies. And so there's going to be those kind of maybe issues that we might have to talk about or help with adjustment. And that's what we're hoping the Imam at this Al-Hidayah would give us some kind of cultural cues. It's like, okay, I just met you. I just can't sit down and say, so are you traumatized from leaving your country? So we have to learn. That's what we're trying to learn what to do next.
What about language skills? I would imagine that there are going to be many of these who may not speak English very well, if at all. And what's been interesting to me to learn a little bit since over the past couple of months is that Afghanistan is really a very multi-ethnic, multilingual country. It's there's 3 or 4 distinct, maybe more, ethnic groups with their own different dialects or languages. Is this going to be another hurdle these folks who will be arriving here will have to get over? Because not a whole lot of Vermonters speak any of those dialects, I think, that they speak in Afghanistan.
Well, from what we heard, if you think about this group has some kind of connection with the U.S. government in terms of maybe working at the embassy or in the military or with a nonprofit or getting granted. So we hope and assume that at least one member of the family would speak some form of English with that connection. And just from my experience, I can say here publicly, this Afghan refugee issue is not going to go away in America for the next, I would say, let's say 20, 25 years, given from what I saw from the Vietnamese refugee issues, the Cambodian refugees issue, the Laotian refugee issues. So, so my point was that this wave, I think it will be more, I would say, educated or more exposed to Western culture and English versus like the wave that will come later. I'm assuming.
Yeah, and one of the things we're encouraging people to do too is do our best to start learning at least some basic phrases. One of the pieces of advice that we've gotten is that between choosing to learn Pashto and choosing to learn Dari, learning Dari is probably going to be more efficacious because it's easier for an English speaker, and also because the likelihood that a Pashto speaker would also speak Dari is high. And the Brattleboro Public Library's Mango Languages program includes a Dari program that's free for library card holders, and I expect maybe the Bennington Public Library also has the Mango program. So that's something people could do from home anytime.
And also we heard through USCRI in Colchester, I believe they have someone as a translator on the telephone that, we could call and use that service. But I don't know how much that costs. So.
I was wondering, what since mid-August or so, or whenever they were left Afghanistan, they've been living, I guess, in military camps of one sort or another. I guess I'm just wondering, typically, I guess the long-term goal for many of these people once they're settled here and have a place would be to get a green card to allows them to work. Can one of you describe how one goes about getting a green card? What do you have to do first before you're qualified for that?
Yeah, I can answer that. And then Ananda, you probably
no, I'll let the expert, please.
You probably have a totally different perspective on it than I do.
No, I was young then, so I got my green card because of my parents.
Right. Thanks, parents. Yeah. So I mean, it depends, right? It depends on the status that people are granted when they arrive. An asylum seeker who gets into the asylum system, the sort of quote unquote normal asylum system, though there's nothing normal about it, can expect to be in that court proceeding for 5 to 7 years. It is a nightmare. It is long, it is arduous. It's ridiculous, it's broken, right? It's designed to be broken. My understanding is that as of now, what the government is offering to humanitarian parolees is an expedited asylum process that would take a shorter time. Once people are granted asylum, after that, there's a period of waiting, and then there's another claim that has to be filed to adjust status to residency or to get a green card. There's some talk that the government may be pressured to expedite that process even further and to grant residency more automatically or more quickly. That would obviously be beneficial for this population and well-deserved, as it is for everybody. But yeah, it is a lengthy step-by-step process that involves a lot of legal expertise that's necessary. I have a colleague, an immigration attorney, who recently took a pro bono case of getting humanitarian parole for an Afghan family of 11. And it took forever, and she is working pro bono, has little kids at home. And it's a really heavy lift in terms of the attorney expertise that's required. And so one of the things that we're proudest of is that we've been able to connect the asylum seekers we work with pro bono attorneys around New England, which they have just been amazing people in terms of the dedication that they have. So we're grateful to them for that.
And just before we have to go here, I guess I just wondered how many Afghan refugees do you think Vermont could accept in theory? I mean, 100 sounds like not a large number out of 130,000 or so refugees that we were able to evacuate from Kabul there in the last chaotic week or so. And you hear so much about workforce needs here and declining, an aging demographic. I would think that the state could easily absorb way more than 100. Is that your sense of it as well, or is it kind of a good?
You have more working experience on this from what I just seen. I mean, for us, the main issue is housing, like everything. Well, like at BCOA, Joe asked, how many can you host? Well, right now we can host 2 families because we were able to find an apartment and a homestay. But that 198, I don't know.
Yeah, I would concur with, and I think that's characteristically sage response from Ananda, that I think housing is our biggest concern. And we have a huge housing crisis in the state, and that is not the fault of a refugee influx. It's the fault of other economic forces that we need to reckon with ourselves in order to also, make space for our own working and middle class populations as well, and also welcome as many people as we can, because we do have those needs, as you said, Andrew, in terms of workforce. And we want people, we want diverse populations, we want to support as many new neighbors as we can.
And not only that, the benefits to Vermont, according to the American Institute on Immigration, 5% of business owned in Vermont belongs to immigrants, producing roughly $55.4 million in 2018. So it's not I do not want to get into, I prefer not to get into the economic benefits of immigrants, because for me, that's kind of cheap, because here we have a moral responsibility to accept these Afghan refugees. The number of how many, we hope the more, the better, because I believe the United States made this mess, and it's our responsibility to clean it. And I hopefully will, and that's my last point, sorry. Kate was talking about earlier, hoping that the government will turn the give the humanitarian parole refugees refugee status, right? The HB, because we want BCSA is looking to do an advocacy campaign, writing to our senator, and governor, and president, asking that is the moral responsibility of Americans to give all these people coming refugee status from Afghanistan.
So before we go, I guess if someone's watching this and thinking, I'd like to help somehow or another, they can get in touch with either both of you or your respective organizations and sign up and indicate what they might be able to do, whether it's provide an apartment or just sort of, help them get to the grocery store or something like that once they're here and settled. Would that be the way to go?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, folks can go to www.caspvt.org, as in Community Asylum Seekers Project Vermont, caspvt.org. And then you guys have a handle yet? Or are you still working on it?
No, we do not. We're just still emerging. So we do have a Gmail account, bcopenarms@gmail.com. That our volunteers will connect you to the different groups. Please, if you live in the Bennington County area and we help in any way, we have a grandmother who just wants to write thank you notes and write letters to refugees. Oh, and maybe we'll get her writing letters to your asylum seekers, Kate, if they need a letter from why they should come to Vermont. That's her reasoning to people who
your own PR department.
Yeah.
So I had one final question. The climate of Vermont, is it similar to Afghanistan, or are these folks going to come here in December and go, wait a minute, snow? What's this? Is this going to be, will we sort of roughly have the same kind of, over the course of a year, similar weather, or are they going to be in for a big shock?
We both of our organizations have a partner in Noah Coburn, who is an anthropologist at Bennington College. And Noah recently offered a workshop for volunteers looking to host Afghans. And one of the things he said, he's worked in Kabul and in Afghanistan for many years as an anthropologist, and said the climates are actually relatively similar, and that he thinks the thing that both cultures have in common is a lot of cranky farmers from the mountains. So, so I think, in terms of chilliness, Afghanistan is a geographically diverse country, so it kind of depends where you're talking about, right? But I think it's certainly probably easier in terms of climate to move here from Afghanistan than, for example, from Panama.
Okay. Well, at least we got that one in reasonably good shape then, and that's important. Anyway, well, thank you both again for making the time to share all of this with you. I really want to thank Kate Paarlberg-Kvam of CASP, with the Asylum Seekers Project, and Anandaroopa of Bennington County Open Arms. Thank you both very much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts on this subject. And we'll certainly be watching as hopefully some of these refugees begin to arrive here in Vermont, and we can help them out and be good neighbors. All right, well, that'll do it for us for today. I want to thank all of you who've been watching. I'm glad to have had you with us. Hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Have a great day.